study abroad program here in Florence, which is one of the bigger and more successful ones. We were having a chat about it just now, and this is one of the study abroad programs that actually studies the city in a serious way, looking at the art and fashion and the whole architecture and the cultural fabric of the city. Because some of the programs use it as a pretty backdrop to study engineering, which is strange. And he's a proper academic. He's just published a great book about the city-states in late medieval Italy. So tonight you're hearing from somebody who's really done the original research and knows an awful lot about what he's talking about. So, Fabrizio, with you.
Thank you very much, Simon. So thanks for inviting me here. It's always a pleasure. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? Yes. And the emotional language of justice in Italy. So this lecture comes out from actually it's one of the first topics I've developed in my academic career. When I was a student at the University of Warwick in England, the Midlands, and I started my PhD in 1998 and I completed in 2004. Under the supervision of many eminent historians in the UK, from Humphrey Butters to Alison Brown and Sam Cohn, who is now teaching at Glasgow University of Glasgow. This is more or less a chapter of my PhD dissertation, which has been transformed into a book. In 2015, with the University of Florence, Andrea Zorzi and I developed the idea of offering to the academic community the opportunity of investigating the relationship between emotions and the Renaissance without being involved in neurosciences, but from the perspective of these stories. It came out a research of this kind based on my expertise, because I'm a medievalist by trade, and the focus of my research is, let's say, the time of Dante, the time which goes from the 1250s until the plague of 1348. Dante was born in 1265 and died in 1321, and that is the real golden age of the Italian city-states. The book which came out recently, a few weeks ago, talks about this. I wrote it with Mario Ascheri from the University of Siena, one of the most, I think, according to me, interesting kind of intellectuals we have in this country nowadays. So I try to framework the topic within this kind of chronology. So trying to see what happened in the main city-states of northern and central Italy, without comparing this topic with other realities outside of Italy, because the late Middle Ages, which is the period I've mentioned before, had a lot of, let's say, governmental experiments outside of northern and central Italy. For instance, in south of Italy, we have a kingdom. The same happened in Germany, as well as in Spain, as well as in England, and in France as well. So the case of Italy is very peculiar, and it's a sort of a theater within which you can study the evolution of the self-governmental systems and the ways in which they approach, public life. The second part of this lecture will be connected to the Iconology of justice, how justice, which is at the center of the reason of the main theologians and the jurists of the time of Dante, is connected with the idea of the common good. And the third part will be connected to emotionology, so the emotional language of justice, how justice was used to condition, the flock, people, in a direction or in another. Now, the background. So we are in northern and central Italy. So as you can see from the map, we have more than 30 city-states in this small piece of land in this century. Actually, Italy is not independent. It's under the Holy Roman Empire. It's the Hohenstaufen crown in Germany, which should control the territory. But there is a vacuum of power in the country, and no one controls anyone. And as we know, we have the development of the Republic of Florence, the Republic of Venice, the Republic of Pistoia, Pisa, Prato, and so on and so forth. All of them were what? City-states. Cities acting as states. And as I've told you before, there is an exception, and two exceptions actually in the country, because we have the papal state, the state of the Pope, the Holy See, which is mostly part of central Italy, the actual Marche region, as well as the Lazio region, and partially sometimes also the piece of land which goes up to Chioggia, south of Venice, through the Emilia-Romagna, and then south of Italy, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, in other words, with Naples at the top of the control of this monarchical California. What is a commune? What is a city-state? The sources are talking about, and we are more or less at the end of the 1100s, talking about arengo, arengario, parlamentum, concione, consilium. So we have these kind of nouns in Latin, which are developing and revealing the idea of a square or a meeting point in which people are meeting for deciding for the community. Now, this could be the topic of another lecture, but what happens right after the collapse of the Roman Empire is the fragmentation of Europe in different kind of pieces, more or less connected within what? Monasteries and castles. The castle more or less enlarges itself as well as the monastery. Mostly in France, we have many monasteries. After the year 1000, we have the reorganization of life around these monasteries or castles. Some of them, Siena, for instance, was a castle, is progressively transformed into a city. Florence was transforming itself from an army camp into a city in the 1100s, and so on. What happened inside of this situation, instead of this kind of small piece of land? People are meeting from the countryside. So there is a migration from the countryside into the city-state. And instead of the city, we have a sort of need of organization of the community itself. And in fact, we talk about construction of walls, cities, then of course the importance of the religious aspect, cathedrals, parishes, and so on and so forth. So in other words, life went back to be organized in a smaller dimension compared to what happened in the Roman Empire. Italy is peculiar, as I was saying before, compared to Europe, because in the rest of Europe you have monarchical powers. So it means that you have an elite of people at the top of which of whom you have a leader, can be a queen, can be a king, but someone is controlling the state who combines, who fuses, mixes together the three main powers which are guaranteed in any democracy in society. We have the division between legislative power, executive power, and the army. You are in a democracy. If you have the combination of these three elements in one single person, you have a tyrant. This is not happening in northern and central Italy. So we have a group of people who are gathering in the same place and are by default and forced to organize themselves in a sort of civic kind of life. The evolution of the city-states. We have three big phases, let's say. One is called the consular commune. The second step is the commune of the podestà. The third one is the commune of the popolo. And here I would like to concentrate my attention on the third part. What is the consular commune? So the political structure of these city-states or city republics actually is not changing. So you don't have any evolution. What changes is the ruling class. So those who are controlling the state. The consular commune is really inspiring itself from the Roman experience. The consuls are named that way because they are picked from the consular governmental system during the time of Caesar and so on in the Roman history, and are expression of the square. So the square elects two people who are in charge of deciding for the community. The second step is the so-called Comune del Podestà. What's the difference between the commune of the consuls and the commune of the Podestà? No difference in terms of political organization. The constitution is the same. We have the same kind of approach. People are meeting together. we have, instead of two people controlling the executive power, we have only one person. This person, named Podestà, is coming from the outside, is a foreigner. Usually, for instance, in Florence, you have Podestàs coming from Umbria. No? Cante de Gabrielli dal Cubbio, who is the Podestà who judges Dante Alighieri and sends him to exile in 1302, precisely on January 18. So he's coming from Perugia. Okay, so it means that they were what? Professional political scientists, in other words. There is a fantastic book organized by the École Française de Rome, published at the beginning of the year 2000, on the circulation of the Podestàs all over northern and central Italy. You can study name by name and see what kind of profession and positions these people are getting from a place to another. Who are they? They are expression of the nobility, of the aristocracy. We are not talking about any middle class or popolo. So these first two phases are mostly controlled by the, those who have properties in the countryside, owners of castles, owners of farms in the countryside, those who didn't have the need of working with their hands. The big revolution happens with the third step of the city-state, the time of Dante, because we have the popolo taking off. And of course, you need to be careful with defining the meaning of popolo, and I will try to give you a few elements for understanding better the reasoning tonight. But there is a big revolution, no way. Marx, when he writes down the Capital in 1848, he quotes the example of the Ciompi of 1378. The revolt of the Ciompi is a popular revolt in 1300 Florence. Now, the big question is the following: what is the popolo? Who are those who are making the popolo existing? And this is a beautiful miniature coming from a chronicler from the city-state of Venice. We are, of course, period which goes from the 1312 and 1300s. And what do we see? We see people talking to each other. And they are what? Managing the city-states. The state is framed by walls. The walls, I don't know if you have been to Piazzale Michelangelo, but everyone takes a look to the Ponte Vecchio, but you should take a look to the walls. No? The walls of Dante, which were started in 1284 and finished, completing 1333, which is the year of the big flood in Florence, the first one, recorded and narrated by Giovanni Villani, the chronicler. So these people are not in an act of war, are not fighting, are not horseback. These people are simply walking, and talking to each other. So this is a miniature which talks about the evolution of the city-state of Venice, because Venice has the same kind of evolution as Siena, as Pisa, as Florence had in the same period of time. So the big question is, what is the popolo? The popolo is, let me say in a few words, those who worked. Popolo is the category of people, is a social class which involves all those who had something to sell on the market. Could they be doctors, spice sellers, pharmacists, blacksmiths, butchers, bakers. A few months ago, I was invited to give a lecture at the Teatro Niccolini on Florence in the time of Dante. And, Giovanni Villani talks about the city of Florence, and of course, chroniclers were really in love with talking about the greatness of their city. So he was really pumping up the, the data of everything in the city. I was talking about 148 bakeries in Florence in the time of Dante, 148 bakeries. And I called Confindustria and I said, can you tell me how many bakeries you have now in Florence in 2023? And they told me 85. So I was really shocked. Of course, now we have bars, and there you sell carbs as well. But evidently, so having 140 something bakeries in the city-state of Florence meant that we are talking about a metropolis. We're talking about a city which was in the need of providing food to many people, many citizens. And he talks about the numbers. 100,000 citizens are living in Florence. In this period of time, London had 15,000 citizens, Paris 10,000, nothing. Florence is a giant compared to, and Venice is very close, as well as Milan. So this kind of city-states in which we have the evolution between the aristocracy to the people, to the popolo, so this big evolution, it's, I think, one of the most interesting historical elements, which are talking about the evolution of the Western civilization. So you could observe this in the long perspective, on the big picture of everything. And should you want to go farther, and I'm mentioning Roberto Sabatino Lopez, Gaetano Salvemini, eminent historians who have Trevor Dean in England, or Philip Jones. Philip Jones wrote down one of the most magistral books on the city-states in northern and central Italy, published by Clarendon Press, Oxford University Press. You have this kind of, instead of this kind of small niche, you have the evolution of the people, of the middle class, of the bourgeoisie at the beginning. I didn't mention bourgeoisie because you need to wait the 1800s and the French Revolution. But, I've mentioned this in this book because it's times are mature for talking about this kind of big evolution, observing the evolution, the big picture that I was telling before. So, those who had a job position, laborers, are members of the popolo. And of course, what happens, human beings are not able to share things. The popolo was divided in 3 subcategories. If you check the sources, the chroniclers, you will see that you have popolo grasso, popolo mediano, popolo minuto. Now, popolo grasso, Sam Cohn is, it's a close friend of mine, it's the fat cat. He talks about these things when he refers to popolo grasso. Grasso because they are fat, because they eat at breakfast, at lunch, and at dinner. They have money. But in other words, it means that they were wealthy, rich people. Then you have the popolo mediano. Popolo mediano are those who are in the middle, pharmacists, very respectable professions, but not doctors. In the popolo grasso, you have mostly what? Silk producers, wool producers, those who sold products all over the known world at that time. Think that the Florentine merchants were selling products in the Flanders, in Holland, in Germany, in North Africa, in the Middle East. So these people had an international profile. They walked from a place to another easily with no big difficulties. So we are talking about this, skilled workers, masters, and of course, inside of this kind of big, huge category, you have a progressive distinction between them. And in fact, this is very interesting, my doctoral thesis goes from the 1250s to the middle of the 1400s. And I studied the primary sources in the Terra Cava Florence. You can see the evolution of the name of these people. And more they get nobilized, getting more and more aristocratic. They try to get to copy the method of living of those who were living before them. And of course, creating a distinction between them and the others. Of course, this is the beginning of the end, because it's a failure of the city-state experiment that I will try to tell you at the end of this reason. So we have merchants in the big category of merchants and artisans. So those who produce, but also those who sold things, people involved in commercing, trading. This is a quotation from Dino Compagni. Dino Compagni is another very important chronicler in the time of Dante, probably one of the most important chroniclers. Without Dino Compagni, you cannot understand Dante or Brunetto Latini or Remigio di Girolami. And Dino Compagni mentions the beginning of the priorate in Florence on August 15, 1282. So the key date is 1282. So we're having the rise of the popolo in 1282. Remember what I'm telling you now. The popolo is also made of people with no instruments. In other words, cultural instruments. So this is the anxiety of going up in the society. So an art is very easy to be understood by everyone. It's more difficult to read a book than trying to understand who David is. So Dino Compagni talks about the fact that on a certain moment the popolo, this category, is electing by neighborhood. At that time, Florence was divided in 6 parts, 6 neighborhoods. Then from 1343 was divided in 4 quartieri. Now they are quarters, but before they were sixth, sesti. Sesto di Oltrarno, Sesto di San Pier Scheraggio, Sesto del Duomo, Sesto di Santa Maria Novella, eccetera. And he talks about the fact that in Florence, as well as in many other city-states, we have the organization of the popolo into a ruling class. So the popolo is now, and this is the revolution, so the fact that the popolo is now controlling the state, one of the most important nations of Europe at that time, the city-state of Florence, the Republic of Florence. Remember, Florence was, of course, was not a city. Florence was a state. And how is this governmental system organized? Through the guild, the association of workers. So don't get confused between guilds and unions nowadays, okay? Because in the Renaissance, what is important is the production, the product, is not the laborer, is not the worker. So what is important is Michelangelo never was thinking to himself as a genius. Michelangelo was simply a worker, okay? Obsessed by himself. He worked like 15 hours a day with no interruption. Was a workaholic. They had a professional approach. They had an artisanal approach to their job. They were not thinking to themselves as stars, let's say. So here you can count them. We have around 21 guilds in the city-state of Florence, but this is determined by the demand of the market. Economy determines the evolution of the political framework of a community. And of course, in this case, you have on the extreme right, for instance, axe makers, cap makers, bakers. Then you have the eagle on the left, top left, which is the symbol of the silk producers, as well as the Calimala, Calle Male, which is the street which is very close to us, Via di Calimala. And of course, the eagle is also the bird which flies over the other. So it's the symbol of the merchant, because these people, walked from Florence to the rest of the world. They went in England to buy the raw material, wool stuff, and then back. Or if they were rich enough, they could have, bought a horse, but this was a privilege for the few, not for the many. So the majority of these workers were really intense workers, let's say. And these guilds are making the city exist. I give you a few things, a few elements to understand how perfect is this system in this period of time. All the guilds had workers inside of them, members of the guilds. All of them were put under taxation. These taxes were given to the guild. The guild was obliged to return this money to the community for building what? Kindergarten, schools, squares, fountains, whatever, okay? So there is a sort of virtuous reinvestment, and we are talking about the time of Dante, not yesterday. So 7 centuries ago, more or less. And this phenomenon goes up until the 1730s, when Gian Gascone failed the Medicean tradition in 1737. Now, and here I go with justice. Why? Because justice cannot be read. Justice needs to be seen. You cannot talk about justice talking about Aristotle or Plato, mostly Aristotle. The politics of Aristotle. You need to visualize, and you will see how justice is visualized for being clear to everyone. Should you not act properly, you will have this or that. Now, of course, this is the general outline of the second part of my reasoning. Of course, this is not a perfect kind of society. You have a lot of internal conflicts. Why? Because of this, for the supremacy of the state. Should they be Guelphs or Ghibellines in the 1200s? Should they be whites or blacks at the beginning of 1300? Should they be magnates or popolari? Okay, so the big competition inside there is between magnates and popolari. There is a fantastic book, which is every student in medieval history at the University of Florence needs to read from the beginning, from Gaetano Salvemini. It was published in 1899, and no one wrote down a masterpiece as such, I have to say, which is titled this way, Magnate Popolari a Firenze, 289-1302. And here we have the first element which makes us thinking a lot about the importance of the centrality of justice, the emotional imprinting of justice in Renaissance Italy. Because the competition between magnates and popolani is like narrated, is developed through the big metaphor of the wolves and the lambs. The popolani, which are now at the government, should be considerable as wolves, but they portray themselves as lambs, while the magnates, who are the aristocrats, who should be the wolves, you know, are actually the wolves. The problem is that the lambs are eating the wolves. Now, this is Giotto di Bondone, which is a beautiful representation of Saint Francis, who is trying to resolve the problem of social tension in the city-state of Arezzo. Francesco is trying to put the demons outside of the city, and the demons are representing the competition, the conflict, the internal conflict, you know, the hierarchy of the city, which is not productive to the city-state itself. We need peace in the city-state, because through peace we can handle we can reach the common good. Ordinamenta Justitiae. This is actually really part of my PhD dissertation, because the ordinances of justice, Ordinamenta Justitiae, are of course Latin, classical Latin, because in the 1200s until the plague of 1348, the majority of sources in the city-state are in Latin, and you need to be able to read it if you want to read them. And what happens? Exactly what I was mentioning before. The weak lambs are saying, we cannot stay with the aggressive wolves in the city. And because they are so aggressive, and they are expression of a society which is not anymore good, profitable for the city-state itself, you know, we are feeling ourselves as authorized to marginalize them. Now, this is a big, huge topic, of course, because it's very sophisticated, the way in which this society is putting at the corner part of itself from the 1200s until the middle of the 1400s. When you have a strong kind of government, it's not so difficult. Think about Mussolini or Hitler. You marginalize people, sending them into concentration camps. So confinement is a typical, no? Is a typical way for marginalizing people, should you are in a tyranny. But if you are in a proto-democracy, like in this case, you know, you need to be more cautious and paying a lot of attention, because you get exposed to the judgment of the other. And of course, what happens, and I will talk about this in a few minutes, there is a slide on it. So there is the invention of the so-called ban, which is a monetary fine. No? I will talk about the example of Dante in a few seconds. Here we have the Ordinamenta Justitiae, the first imprinting of the metaphor of the wolves and the lamb backwards. So when I was reading this when I was 25 years old, I was, you know, I wondered, you know, where are we? So these people are not trained, didn't attend any school, are not able to write and read. They knew Pedro's, of course, orally. They had a classical tradition, an oral classical tradition. But, you know, writing down a book like this in Latin with this kind of sophisticated metaphor to marginalize the aristocrats in the city-state of Florence, you know. And if you go in Bologna, you find the same thing. If you go in Pistoia, you find the same thing. Go in Prato, you find the same thing. Of course, I compare this in my PhD, that they're not here, because the example is one among the many. So this makes you thinking about the high quality of these butchers, bakers, blacksmiths, and so on. Making justice possible, Brunetto Latini talks about justice is crucial for avoiding what? Adhering to the law. In other words, factionalism, he says. No, factionalism is the worst evil in every society. And this is reinforced by Remigio de Girolamo. Who are they? Both teachers of Dante Alighieri. Brunetto Latini is a notary, a notary who massively inspired Dante in his writing. And Remigio de Girolamo was actually the teacher of Dante in Santa Maria Novella when he was at school. Dominican friar, and the typical attitude of Dominican friars is that of teaching. Now, they are theologians, they are not Franciscans, which is another category compared to them. So both are talking about, you know, the centrality of justice is necessary to create the common good, to avoid the friction between people, meaning faction, call it as you want, bipolarism, you know, but for creating the necessary peace for developing the economical, political, social trend of the community. Seeing how sophisticated, you know, they are in the 12 and 1300s. Giotto di Bordone, again, I'm not obsessed by Giotto, but Giotto was the painter of the Franciscans, and Giotto was following the Guelph line in Italy from the Kingdom of Naples. Then you find him in Rome, you know, with many works of art. Then in Perugia, then in Florence, and then of course in Padua. And this is the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua, which is, I think, one of the most interesting masterpieces ever painted by anyone. Of course, you know, he lived 1 century and a half before Michelangelo, so no comparison is possible. Giotto is in charge by Enrico Scrovegni to paint a space like this. I don't know if you've been in the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua, a small church donated by this merchant to the city-state of Padua in exchange of its favors. In which terms? I give you the basilica, the church, for having my sins purged by the sin of usury, because I'm a merchant. And whom better than Giotto di Bordone to embellish the inside? Of course, the seven deadly sins, as well as the virtues of the Christian galaxy, were the elements which were asked by the patron, Enrico Scrovegni, to the client, Giotto di Bordone, who receives in 3 installments money for completing the fresco. And of course, we have 2 beautiful niches. These are painted, okay? So we are before perspective, but Giotto was able to develop in a flat surface this kind of idea of the 3D dimension, which was, of course, invented later by Don Battista Alberti in the 30s of the 1400s. But Giotto was so great that, you know, this kind of illusion is possible with him as well. And we are in 1306, 1305, 1306, in the center and in the heart of the city-state experience. This is justice. Justice is usually a woman, okay, set, sometimes blindfold. She cannot see because she needs to be impartial by default. And of course, she holds a balance, a libra. In this case, you have 2 people, you know, 2 men on top of them, because she measures the quantity of sins you have in your body. And of course, on the bottom line of the painting, you have scenes from, you know, cultivated land, let's say fertile situation, with people in a joyful condition. While injustice is a man who is not taking a look to the audience, but he's turning his attention on the right in this case, and more than everything, you have scenes of fighting on the bottom line. So injustice produces factionalism. Justice creates the common good, the virtuous kind of society. This is Simone Martini. We are in the Palazzo Pubblico in Siena. Everybody goes to Siena to I don't know to see what, but the most important thing is this Madonna with a child inside of the Sala del Maggior Consiglio, close to the room of the Nine. What is the Sala del Maggior Consiglio? It's the room of the big council. The people met in the square. They elected a selected number of people. In this case, we are 150 for Siena. So they met there without any literacy. Remember that, what I've told you at the beginning. These are members of the popolo. They have not attended any school. They are professional. They work with their hands. Very few of them can be doctors or notaries or lawyers, attorneys at law. The majority are professionals, artisans. And of course, again, so the room is full of images. Images for what? For talking about Aristotle, for talking about philosophy, for talking about theology, for training them, for teaching them how to act for the common good. Now, if you go closer and you observe only the center of image, you have Mary. Remember that Siena is in honor of Mary, of Virgin Mary, la Madonna. Because on September the 4th, 1260, Siena is won on the Florentines, the Battle of Montaperto. The Guelphs and the Ghibellines fought in the middle of the two, in the middle of the fields, and the Siena is won. The Florentines lost. So from that moment onward, the city of Siena is massively devoted to Mary. Think about, Simone Martini, many others. La Maestà, Madonna con angeli e santi. But if you go closer, you see that the child is not only the sweetheart, is not only Jesus. You can use this kind of metaphor for talking about fertility, eternal youth, for many things. If you go to the Hospital of the Innocents, of course, you will see many children surrounding Mary. If you go in a cathedral, you might find scenes like this. But now you are in a Palazzo Pubblico, you are not in a church. So it's not a religious space, it's a lay space, the civic space, in which you have a religious image. Quentin Skinner from the School of Cambridge, who was an advisor of my PhD, wrote down, I think, a magistral book on this, how justice in the Western civilization starts. Don't ever forget that this is the first time in history in which you don't have the practice of slavery. The Greeks and the Romans practiced slavery. So we can talk about democracy as long as you want at the time of Cicero. But the Romans went to the terms, the baths, okay? Here we have workers who are going from Florence to the Middle East, to North Africa, to buy the raw material, producing things, and then selling them all over the known markets. Professional merchants, people in considerable, in the middle of the middle class. Now, the child is, of course, is Mary with the child, is Madonna with the bambino. Mary is pure, and Christ is the Son of God. But the child is doing what? Is holding a titulus, a piece of paper, piece of parchment. It's not paper. Paper was not invented at that time. In which it is written, should you go closer, diligite justitiam qui judicatis terram. Diligite justitiam qui judicatis terram. Please, you rulers on earth, follow justice. Because if you don't follow justice, bye-bye, baby. You are lost. You are not having any common good. You are not respecting the good novel that I'm announcing, with showing you what's a good thing for the community. So justice is already at the center of the emotional language of the city-state. And of course, should you go up in terms of chronology, this concept is progressively developed. Now I'll go backwards because I need to go to the room of the priors in Siena. But this is Viaggio di Antonio Tucci, and here you have the typical, classical, going Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C. I've been there many times when I was teaching at Georgetown University. And you have the main court of the US, at the top of which you have this kind of image here in marble, but it's exactly the same. And you have two kind of elements in the left hand, the libra, in the right hand, the sword. So you have an evolution in the emotional conditionment of this kind of expressionism of the representation of justice. Now, I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not a philosopher. So I've, of course, read key books on emotionology, on neurosciences and their approach to history, and how, of course, there is a fantastic book written by Victor Turner in the 1960s by the ritual process, talking about history. History is what? Nothing more than a continuous ritual process. It happens because people are gathering in the same place, talking, discussing, then moving, going further, producing things, events. So in a few words, emotions are determined by what? By the cultural background in which they are produced. So we are reacting to that sentence in 2024 differently from the way in which someone in 1498 was observing at the beginning of May, the burning of Savonarola in the middle of Piazza della Signoria. Oh, he's the scene there, it's correct, that's burning. So, Lucien Febvre. But more than everyone, Barbara Rosenwein are the two main experts. Lucien Febvre, of course, is expression of the French school, the school of the Annales Françaises, of the Collège de France. They are the first at the beginning of the 1900s to make history entry into uncharted territories. I'm thinking about sociology, anthropology, demography, and paradoxically speaking, the neurosciences before the codification of the neurosciences as well. Emotional life, always ready to overflow intellectual life. So these kind of things are elements which are making this reasoning work. And again, Barbara Rosenwein, she teaches at UCLA. She's a colleague of mine. Emotions are depending on language. She insists a lot on this aspect, the language of the expressions, the way in which things are proposed are determining a reaction from people. And of course, culture is a framework in this kind of language within itself. Gina Fasoli, another historian, she points out the virus of these city-states. What Brunetto Latini, as well as Remigio De Girolami were talking about, factionalism. So should they be Guelphs or Ghibellines or Magnati or Popolani? And of course, these kind of aspects are determined by lust, pride, but more than everything, everyone is convinced that avarice or greed is one of the elements which are conditioned in this society to be imperfect, not perfect. And Sassetta, so this is visible should you go to Harvard University here in Florence, the Laetati. So they have a patrimony of works of arts in their collection. And let me go to the detail. So you have lust, pride, and of course, avarice on your right. So the bag. You know how many times we have seen the bag full of gold florins, full of Venetian ducats, full of British pounds, and so on and so forth. The bag of the merchant, Lo sterco del diavolo, Dante says. Lo sterco del diavolo. And on the opposite side of vices, you have virtues. The virtues representation of the governmental system. And in this case, you have again Ambrogio Lorenzetti, who is in this time we are in the room of the nine. You know that Florence has priors, Siena has the nine, but they are the same thing. So they are nothing more than the expression of the executive power. So they were those who were in charge of writing down the laws into the Biccherne. No? If you go to study Siena in the archive, instead of finding provisioni, as you find in the State Archive of Florence, and I read all of them from the 1250s to the 1450s, you find the Biccherne. The Biccherne are nothing more than the records, these huge books in parchment collected by these covers in wood, very heavy. And I usually needed a week, 8 hours a day to read one, you know, when I was a student at the Archive of Florence, and selecting the information I needed. And at the center, you have actually you have two people in the center. The man sat on the throne, of course, the city-state of Siena, in this case, surrounded by the virtuosities around him, and of course you have magnanimity, pride, pax, pace, peace, temperance, and so on. On the right part of it, you have, of course, the extreme right. You have again the representation of justice. And justice, and then it's very interesting to see the 24 people who are walking to devote, you know, their on credibility to the state of Siena. And there are those who are making the government, the city-state of Siena, the officers of the city-state of Siena. On their left, you have the representation of justice. And justice is here represented exactly as it is here, no? Sword in hand, and on the right hand with a sword. What is Ambrogio Lorenzetti talking about? Ambrogio Lorenzetti is talking about punitive justice and commutative justice. So justice is progressively transforming itself into something different. It's not only on the left or right, you have these people ready to be executed, beheaded. You see them. And justice, if I remember correctly, is holding a head, you know, on their legs. Because in the communal society, the worst kind of punishment is exactly this, expressed by punitive justice. Justice should be punitive. Dino Compagni talks about the relationship between the execution of an enemy of the state and the ways in which justice can lead this enemy to be executed, which is not so easy in a deeply Christian society. The body of every human being is sacred. How can you desacralize the body, you know, for respecting the norm or the law you have written in the statutes or in the Biccherne? You know? And here we go, torturement, which is typical. Think about, you know, also in the 1500s they have torturement. Machiavelli is tortured many times, many months at the Stinche. But also other enemies of the states, should they be Guelphs or Ghibellines or magnates, sometimes could be put at the colla, which is being bound, you know, by the hands, being suspended to a rope, and then being brought up and down. The typical execution given to witches, you know, in the 15 and 1600s by the Inquisition. So now, in this phase, justice is mostly punitive because citizens need to be educated that way. That is very violent and reveals a very violent kind of society. This is the bad government in the Palazzo Pubblico, in the Room of the Nine in Siena, and at the center of the image, you have Lucifer. Who is Lucifer? Lucifer is an angel, actually, who betrayed God. And being himself, as Dante talks about at the end of Paradise, set on the rings, which are making light, expressing light is God for him at the end of Paradise. So having betrayed God, he collapses, he goes down, and with the weight of the body, he produces the whole, which is making hell existing. No? The 8 rings until the end, the center of the and the closer you go to Lucifer, the hottest. Exactly. So the worse the situation is. And of course, as we know, as Dante talks about, every sin in hell cannot be changed. So the invention of purgatory, Jacques Legoff wrote down a fantastic book on this, the invention of purgatory. Now, purgatory was not existing. They had hell and paradise, but at the same moment, purgatory, is created. Purgatory is the effect, the result of the new class, of the new rise of the middle class, no? who needs indulgences for purging the soul of the sins they have committed in life, mostly usury, as was mentioning before with Enrico Scrovegni. And in purgatory, you have what? The same sins you have in hell. But the difference is that in hell, you are forever, permanently there. In purgatory, you see this soul going up until the earthly paradise in a continuum. Why? Because the more they receive indulgences, the more their position in purgatory can change. Very interesting kind of mentality, which makes justice being emotional enough. Now, justice. Where is justice here? Justice is a woman, as we know. But in this case, she's here. Can you see her? She is not set on a chair. She is not blindfolded. She's simply bound. She cannot move. She is not free to act. And Lorenzetti says, okay, as soon as we have a society with justice cannot be free, cannot exercise itself equally, la legge è uguale per tutti. You're not in a society based on the common good, at the center of which you have the idea of citizenship, the citizen. And of course, Lorenzetti reinforces the concept with closing people, inside of the windows of their apartments and not going outside. I've not put any, I think, an image of the good government on the opposite wall. But the opposite wall, you have what? A fertile countryside full of merchants, full of peasants, full of cinte senesi, this wild boar with this white stripe, ready to be slaughtered in the city states, for giving pork, to the meat and food to everyone. A fertile situation, which is totally opposed to the frozen countryside, the burned countryside, which is typical of the bad government, il cattivo governo. And of course, il cattivo governo, the bad government, exists in the moment in which justice is not able to exercise itself, to be free. And here we go with image, of course, and surrounding Lucifer, you have tyranny, tyrants, and of course you have the impossibility of justitia, you can read here, of not acting for the good government of the city-state. The popular governments are developing actually two methods for marginalizing people, because the more you go up in terms of chronology, you find the evolution of exile into two different kind of ways, ban and confinement, bans and confinements. The second aspect, of course, is the death penalty. So, justice exercises itself, shows itself strong enough, you know, in public. There is a fantastic book, but I don't remember the author, but it's The Spectacle of Suffering at the time. The end of the music is always the same. You always go to the second point, even if you start with the first one, unless you remain outside. What is a ban? What is a confinement? A ban is, as I've said before, is a monetary fine. So Dante Alighieri, on January 18, 1302, was fined of 5,000 gold florins. Now, for building Palazzo Strozzi in 1427, 1 century and 30 years later, so the Strozzi family needed 20,000 gold florins. You can calculate the inflation as you want, but Dante was fined to a quantity of money which could not be paid. That's the reason why Dante was sentenced to death. That's the reason why Dante was forced into exile. Dante was never exiled. I insisted with everyone. Told also to Giuseppe Mazzotta, one of the main scholars on this field, don't write down Dante has been exiled. Dante has been banned. Exile is a consequence of the ban. You need to respect the quality of the language of the sources at that time. The second option they had for confining people was confinement, but confinement is easy to understand. Should you go into, once, if I will have the chance for doing it, so sooner or later I have to do that. I would like to publish is the number of these sources, 422, the Otto di Guardia e Balia, Archivio di Stato di Firenze, the Secretary of Florence. It's a book in parchment in which you have all the enemies of Cosimo the Elder. None of them are banned. All of them are confined. Barcelona, Milan, Naples, North Africa, Middle East, Akkar, all the places in which they had an agency of the bank, you have a prison for the prisoner, for the enemies of the state. Now, as I was mentioning before, usually confinement is a sentence in jurisprudence which can be used, not in democratic societies, evidently, but when is it used if you go backwards and you study history? In moments in which governments were very strong. Why? Because if you confine someone, you're telling someone else, a member of, your legacy, of your community, you cannot stay here. You have to stay abroad, outside. As I've said before, you can't have a reaction. If you put a ban, monetary fine, it's not your fault because you gave an option to these people. So this is very subtle stuff, but this is exactly how the popolo is acting against the enemies of the state. The exercise of justice is developed through this kind of sophisticated method for repressing dissent. The death penalty is very easy to understand, and of course, Bernardo Baroncelli, 1478, Pasqua, 1478, 26 di aprile, April 26, 1478, Bernardo Baroncelli, helped by Sixtus IV, helped by the Pazzi family, helped by many others. Bernardo Baroncelli is a butcher, of course. You need the butchers for slaughtering people. It's not so easy to kill, and I didn't try. But anyways, to slaughters, I don't think you need to be. I don't want to say what, but anyways, the majority of people who were involved in conspiracies, plots, coup d'état, were butchers, handled by the top of the society, of course, but the practical stuff, the elimination of the leader, let's say, who embodies the state itself, is done usually by a professional slaughtering. I don't want to go into details about the Patsy conspiracy. I don't know how much time I have, but the Patsy conspiracy failed. Luca Landucci, the chronicler, talks about in details about this, about the repression orchestrated by Lorenzo the Magnificent in the 2 years following the conspiracy. He talks about 80 people who were publicly executed in the city of Florence. From where? From the main windows of the main palazzi of the city-state of Florence, from the Bargello mostly, hanged and then left there until the birds ate themselves until they became skeletons. And of course, from the main, should they be famous, and here I go with the conclusion of my reasoning, you would have been exposed from the main window of the palazzo, in this case, Palazzo Vecchio. I don't know if you have seen Ridley Scott's movie Hannibal, the second chapter. Anyway, it's not so a good movie, but there is a scene which is mentioning the repression of the Patsy conspiracy. So someone is hanged from the main balcony of the only one, actually, of Palazzo Vecchio. Now you have the three flags: the flag of Florence, the flag of Italy, and the flag of Europe. At that time, those who were massively considered were accused of having conspired against the Medici, being allied of the Pazzi family, would have been hanged from that kind of. Usually the stomach of these people was first cut so that, the stomach splashed in the middle of the square, and people were there watching. As well as a few years later, I was mentioning before, at the beginning of May, I remember the day, it should be May 4, when Girolamo Savonarola, the Dominican friar, went probably too far, let's say. So was first hanged and then burned on the stake. There is the symbol of the play, the moment and the place in which he was really, really executed in la Piazza della Signoria. What am I saying? If justice was the emotionality of the emotional language of justice in the communal society was mostly devoted to inform people about their destiny. Now justice is like transforming itself into something more explicit, and it is representing itself into public places. It becomes a spectacle. It becomes something to be. There is a very interesting, another movie I'm mentioning. I don't know if you have seen Braveheart, the last scene of Braveheart. So the scene there is, needs to be offended, needs to be, the body of those who are in the process of being executed need to be desacralized. You cannot be anymore a human being. You cannot be anymore respected by community. The body of the community is rejecting you because you have betrayed the community itself. So the language of justice is now exercising itself in the moment in which you are not anymore part of the community. So that's the only way that a deeply Christian society can execute. Saddam Hussein. I don't know if you have followed. I wrote because I was studying these things in that period of time. But also Gaddafi, So the Ceausescu. Think about Ceausescu and about Mussolini is the perfect example. Hitler knew it. That's the reason why. That's the reason why he did what he did. So the language is always the same. We are made of flesh and bones. So I go back to what I was telling you before. Emotions are determined by the cultural background of a society. According to the cultural background of the society itself, you have the language of justice entering into a communal dispute, a communal experiment, a communal exercise. This is the same, so this is Odoardo Buriani, it's the exhumation of the cadaver of Jacopo Pazzi. Luca Landucci again talks about this kind of very harsh kind of rite of how the cadavers of those who were executed were despoiled, were broken in pieces, into pieces. The arms, the legs were, and then pieces of the bodies were put into the Arno River, usually by children. The companies of children, compagnie di bambini fanno questo. Why children? Because they are like angels. They are pure by nature. They can touch the body of someone who had betrayed the community. So they cannot be infected, in other words. No? And that's the reason why the Compagnia di Bambini, the Otto di Guardia in Balia, and you can read them in the Theatrical Fund, there are the sources for that, you know, are in charge of despoiling the cadavers of the enemies of the state. Here is the exhumation of the cadaver. It didn't go this way, but anyways, the cadaver was really exhumated. We have the children who were singing a song against Jacopo Pazzi, and then the body of Jacopo, Luca Landucci says, was thrown into the Arno River. Let me conclude, and then if you have any question, I'm here for 30 seconds. Not kidding. This is 1501. This example has been studied by William Connell, a friend of mine who teaches at Bowling Green in the US. And it's a story of Antonio Rinaldeschi, a gambler. Okay, a gambler. So you could not be publicly executed should you be a gambler. But you could be publicly executed if you would have thrown dung against the Madonna. You are offending, you are committing blasphemy. And this is the scene. Antonio va alla taverna, he goes to the tavern, you know, he plays, he gambles. Sometimes Machiavelli talks from, you know, in the discourse on the first decade, Hippolytus about that, and the prince as well, or in the letters to Francesco Vettori, what was, you know, gambling at that time. And then he lost money, gets the dung of, you know, of a horse and throw it, third scene, against the image of Holy Mary. He's seen by someone from the window, denounced by the podestà, brought into the Bargello, the sixth scene, then purged by the sins he had committed by a priest, then brought into the, you know, to the rope and then hanged. So this is my conclusion, that as you can see, the language of justice goes public, let's say, progressively. I didn't talk about the fact that the other part of justice was progressively transformed into monetary. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Fabrizio.
Gentle.
As always, a tour de force, an emotional journey where we go all over the place but arrive at a point. It's a special technique that Fabrizio has. So much to think about there. And
how many people?
Yeah, we got 30 people out there. Yeah. And as always, the rules of the game is if you want to ask a question, make a point, put your hand up, and I'm bringing the microphone so the Zoomers can hear us. And Zoomers, if you want to join in, you can put something in the comments, which I'll read out. Or if you're feeling bold, you can unmute and you can talk to us. We'll hear you in the room. So, as anyone wants, have you got anything on the comments? There's a chat here. No, it's very quiet. Anyone want to get started? Yeah. Okay. Let me bring you the microphone.
During this period, when I thought women, apologies. I was curious why a woman is representing justice during this period. A woman is representing, yeah, because given their position in society at the time and from what I understand, I'm just curious on that issue.
Actually, I don't have any answer to that because.
Oh no. Okay.
We are no. I mean, let me turn around and let's see if we find a solution together. But we are in a male-line society, so women are not counting at all. Or they have a very important role into the family environment. In other words, in education, educating the new generation of people. They are totally outside of the political framework. You need to be an outsider. There is not a specific connotation of that kind. But the purity of Mary, the body of Mary, gives birth to Christ, pure himself by default, is one of the reasons why, because justice is the emanation of God, can be represented that way. So, but we don't have the same kind of representation of justice, in the ancient times. Very few examples on the Egyptians, very few on the Romans, but then we have a blank moment, and then we have the communal society in which we have the creation of this kind of iconology. So probably it's the Christian tradition which is making women entering into this kind of reasoning. But as I've told you, we don't have a precise explanation or a codified explanation to that.
Okay. I'll come to you, sir. I've got one. I get a chance, but let's go to the man at the back.
Thank you. Fascinating talk. You talked mostly about justice in republics such as Florence, but I wonder if you could, and it's probably a very big topic, but I wonder if you could briefly contrast how it would have been in monarchies at the same time.
The same thing. Nothing changed. I was mentioning Braveheart, not by chance. From 1066, England is a monarchy with William the Conqueror. And, the situation with Scotland still exists there. But the situation, so Braveheart is the story of this person, mythological person, who is at the end executed as the enemy of the state against the codified common rules of the Crown of England, is an enemy of the community. So, and we are in the 1200s. So, I have mentioned the example of Rinaldeschi. I've mentioned the example of the Pazzi conspiracy. Backwards, I mentioned the example of the sword. It means that they are using the sword for beheading people. In other words, we have the same kind of mechanisms as in republics as well as in monarchies. Considering that from the Magna Carta Libertatum, England, as you well know better than me, so it's a constitutional monarchy. So there are not so many differences between a republican system and a constitutional monarchy.
Jonathan Mandelbaum has a solution for justice being a woman. Jonathan says, wasn't justice represented by women simply as a reference to the Greek themis and the Roman justitia? Yep. Fabrizio agrees with you, Jonathan. Thank you for that solution. Consumers, so I was just put up the link for you to make your contributions. Very gratefully received. Look in the comments to get that. I'll let it free, but we like it when you help us out. I've got one which I wanted to thought I had when you were talking about the ritualistic destruction of the human body as a way of expelling them from the state. I was thinking that as you're doing that about a lot of the central iconography of Christianity, which of course is completely the religion of the commune. That everyone's involved with the church as well. And if you think about it, the story is that Jesus Christ, first of all, was tortured and flagelled and whipped to pieces and had crowns with thorns and was humiliated, and then he was dragged through the streets carrying his cross. Then he was executed as a common criminal in a very brutal way, left to die slowly, hanging from a cross. And just happened along, somebody sticks a spear into his side as well. And so the central emotional language and imagery of Christianity is very much the same thing. It is the human body being destroyed ritualistically and cruelly over time. Not that similar to what happened to Lord William of Wallace in Braveheart. I mean, And I just wondered about your thought on that correlation.
I have a chance of studying this aspect. This makes me thinking also to contemporary society. Think about JFK. Think about you know, the shooting against Pope John Paul II. These kind of rights, which are not, of course, public executions, but they are the elimination of the body of which is embodying the state itself, are, if you put this kind of language into the judicial and, of course, the emotional language of justice, the evolution of the crucifixion of Christ. So the execution of the enemy of the state, the enemy needs to be executed because he's betraying what the sacrifice of Christ is given as a gift to us. So the common body is at the center of the reasoning of this society. Theologians, jurists are all talking about this. And of course, the breaking of the body of the enemy of the state is nothing more than an effect, simple effect of someone who has denied this right to the other. Yes.
Not to change the subject from the more ritualistic desecration of people, but when you were talking about banning and confinement, you said the bans would be fines, and confinement was that prison or is that exile?
Confinement was simply an act, a legal act, in which the government is saying you cannot stay here, you have to stay there.
Okay, so that's like an exile.
The exile is the consequence of the confinement.
Of the confinement, okay.
Because the exile is the condition of those who are forced to live abroad.
But the confinement is not prison.
The confinement is the legal sense. No, it's not the prison. Okay. No, confinement is you know, someone forced to an external destination.
Okay.
This is crucial, I think. So, yeah.
Right. Okay, so any more for any more? It's a richly sophisticated and complex argument, but it's very interesting. Interesting. The difference between martyrdom and sort of elimination is kind of interesting because there's all the Christian martyrs always been put to death in very lurid and extraordinary ways.
To define the meaning of sacred.
Yes.
Sacrality.
Yeah.
What is sacred?
Yeah. To be continued over a glass of wine, I think, because we're getting very, very deep here. So, thank you very much, Fabrizio. Thanks again, Donna, for your support this month. And now thanks also to Poggio Torselli for the wine next door. Thank you very much. Yeah, and thanks, Thomas. We'll see you next week. Bye.